Let's kick off this explainer with a kind of weird question about the classic hero's journey. When we think of epic adventures, whether that's in modern movies or classic literature, we usually expect relentless action, right? The hero faces a massive crisis, barely escapes by the skin of their teeth, and boom, they are immediately thrust right into the next life-threatening situation. But in John Bunyan's 17th century masterpiece, The Pilgrim's Progress, which ironically he wrote while locked up in a gritty prison cell, we get this really profound, unexpected interruption to that whole familiar formula. Think about what our guy Christian has just survived. He just made this grueling climb up the hill of difficulty, he suffered the absolute panic of losing his precious role, and then he had to take a terrifying night walk literally right past a pair of lions. By all normal storytelling conventions, the plot should be rushing him headlong into his next great crisis. But it doesn't. The story just suddenly stops. Christian isn't thrown into another trial. Instead, he gets this purposeful, deliberate pause. He arrives at a place built specifically for pilgrims to rest. So John Bunyan is making a massive point here. Provision, like real food, deep rest, and actual equipping, is literally just as vital to the journey as the dangers are. It's so easy for us to view the spiritual life, or honestly just life in general, as one crisis managed right after another. But Bunyan is loudly insisting through this allegory that pausing to recover is not a sign of weakness. It's not a delay in the mission. Getting fortified before you actually need to be is a fundamental part of the road itself. So let's look at the first section, the four postures, focusing on hospitality and interrogation. When Christian finally gets to the House Beautiful, which allegorically represents the visible church, we get to see exactly how he's welcomed. And this brilliantly illustrates the four maidens of the house not just as characters, but as the active postures a real, healthy community takes toward a weary traveler. First up is Discretion, who meets him at the door to exercise discernment. Once she's satisfied, she calls the others. Piety sits down with him over drinks and asks him to freely retell his entire story, the good, the bad, and the embarrassing mistakes. Then comes Prudence, who probes his inner thoughts. And finally, Charity, who shows deep concern for the loved ones he had to leave behind. They don't just hand him a room key, They offer this deep, holistic engagement. Now here is the really fascinating pivot point. Prudence takes over the interrogation. Up until this point in the story, Christian has mostly been dealing with external threats. People ask him where he's going or where he's been. But Prudence shifts the focus completely away from external events. She isn't asking what happened to him out on the road. She wants to know what is still happening in him. She starts asking these tough, probing questions. She wants to know if he still thinks of the country he left behind. She asks if he still carries his old habits and cravings. And this forces Christian into a moment of brutally honest self-examination. He has to admit that, yeah, he does still carry them. But now it's against his own will. He would absolutely choose to be rid of them entirely if he could. He's discovering that just wanting to do what's right doesn't magically make it easy to actually do it. And that brings us to our next section, the theology of the struggle, looking at the pull of old habits. Christian's response to Prudence here is a striking admission. And honestly, it makes the 17th century text feel incredibly relatable today. When talking about his lingering desires, Christian says, "That which is worst is with me." What Bunyan is doing here is some quiet but super heavy theological lifting. He's borrowing almost word for word from the Apostle Paul in Romans 7. Christian is confessing that true conversion hasn't simply erased the ongoing pull of old sin. The struggle hasn't vanished. What has changed is how he relates to it. The old habits are now an unwanted intruder instead of a welcome friend. Prudence then asks, "Hey, do you ever actually feel those old troubles defeated?" And he admits that completely defeating them is incredibly rare. But when he does find relief, those moments feel absolutely golden. And how exactly does he find that golden relief? Through very specific reflections. He thinks back on what happened at the cross. He looks at the new coat he was given. He reads the role he carries. Or he just lets his thoughts run ahead to his final destination. It's this structured mental recentering that brings him peace. Then the interrogation wraps up with Charity's poignant reminder of the relational cost of his journey. She asks about his family. Christian explains that he pleaded with his wife and kids to come with him, but they thought he was totally overreacting. He had to leave his grieving family behind. And what's really compelling here is that Bunyan doesn't give us some tidy, happy resolution. It's an open wound. But Charity assures him that having a tender conscience, even when it creates a wedge with the people you love, is not a fault. Moving right along to the next section, equipping for the future, where we look at the records and the armory. So, after all this intense questioning, Christian is finally treated to a comforting supper where they discuss how the Lord of the Hill emptied himself out of love for the poor, language that beautifully echoes Philippians 2. After that, Christian actually gets to sleep in a room literally called peace. He wakes up at dawn singing, deeply rested. The next morning, the household takes him to the study to view the ancient records. He reads the lineage of the Lord of the Hill and the incredible acts of past pilgrims. This is Bunyan's way of showing how scripture and church history function together. It proves to Christian that his personal, solitary struggle isn't happening in a vacuum. It fits securely into a much older, grander narrative. He is part of a legacy. Next up, they take him down to the Armory, and this represents preparation in the most literal sense. The household doesn't just offer thoughts and prayers, they physically equip him. They combine classic spiritual armor, the sword, shield, helmet, breastplate, shoes that never wear out, and the weapon called all prayer, with these powerful relics from Israel's history, like Moses' rod, Gideon's trumpets, and David's sling. It's this amazing visual of being armed with both spiritual discipline and the historical proof of God's power. The source material highlights a great quote from these records, talking about those who stopped the mouths of lions and quenched the violence of fire. By pulling directly from Hebrews 11, the famous Hall of Faith, Bunyan is deliberately placing Christian's upcoming battles right inside the lineage of these historical heroes. Christian is being told he belongs in this company before he has even fought a single fight on his own. Talk about a confidence builder, right? Before he hits the road again, they take him all the way up to the roof. They point him south, offering him this distant, hopeful glimpse of a beautiful country called Immanuel's land, from which the celestial city itself can be seen. Now, this isn't just sightseeing. It's pure psychological preparation. By showing him a glimpse of his ultimate destination, they're fueling his motivation to endure the hardships that are waiting for him at the bottom of the hill. Which leads us into our final section. Provision is not a detour because he needs better footing for the fight. Fully armed, totally rested, the household walks him down the hill themselves, but they deliver a pretty sobering warning. His descent into the Valley of Humiliation is going to be incredibly dangerous, maybe even more so than his previous climb up the hill. The rest is over, the battle is about to begin. The core takeaway from this explainer is looking at what the House Beautiful actually represents. Set against everything Christian faced before, what really stands out is how little was asked of him here. He wasn't tested, he wasn't tricked, he wasn't chased. The house simply provided real community, honest teaching, and tangible equipping. But, and this is the crucial part, it didn't offer an escape from the fight. It only offered him better footing so he could actually survive what comes next. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder for your own journey, whatever challenges you might be facing right now. When the road gets brutal and the climb feels literally impossible, do you view taking a moment to rest as a failure? Or do you allow yourself the grace to pause, reflect, and genuinely gear up for the valley ahead? Because as we've seen today, sometimes the absolutely most productive thing you can do for the journey is to simply stop and let yourself be prepared.